Waite. How are you, sir?
Good, sir. How are you? I'm sorry, I'm in my car. I was driving home, but I'm not going to make it in time. So I stopped to where I've got some good signal here, so I don't
Oh,
lose.
perfect. Do you know what? When I first started interviewing and talking to people weeks ago, I thought, you know what? I'd love to talk to Grant Waite. This must be an amazing story. So many different things.
Well, I hope so. I hope it'll be interesting. We'll have some
so,
fun.
so,
Talk about some good stuff.
so I thought, if I get to the fact that I've tried to get hold of him 100 times, I'm sure I'll get an answer. So, but I
Yeah,
thought,
and that's all my doing. I appreciate your persistence, and I'm certainly wasn't ignoring you. Just sometimes I get busy and then I forget about it. So I like what you do, so I'm happy to do it.
I really appreciate it, Grant. I thought it'd be really interesting because I've spoke to a lot of people through this period of time, and there's certain commonalities that seem to keep reappearing in their heads throughout the process of talking to people. One is a certain Mr. O'Grady, who
Yep.
seems to have had a profound impact
Yes.
on golf coaching, um, for the better. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And then there is this side of the new information of biomechanics through Dr. Kwan, and others, Sasho, Mike Duffy, etc. And I thought, you know what? I find it really interesting, but I thought you would probably know better than anybody how these two have sort of evolved and how it's correlated together. Because I see, I remember seeing your biomechanics stuff that came through Quorn, etc. And then I also remember seeing, the old um, Mac style golf swing, and I
Hmm.
just think to myself, I find it amazing how it's evolved, from not just a perspective of a coach looking at swings, but from your perspective as a player who's actually been through it.
Yeah. Okay. So a lot of perspective there, right? And I'll take you back to my Mac days, and which I consider myself, and you said that he's had a profound influence in a lot of coaches, players, and Henny did. And I consider myself lucky to have been able to work with Mac. And be around him for about 2.5 years, which I think is probably a record for anyone that was playing the tour to hang in there. And we spent a lot of time. We stayed together at a few tournaments, and he'd come out a number of times a year. And so one of the things about Mac and is that a lot of his information stands the test of time. There's a lot of things that are just very, very good, and we're ahead of his time. And he was doing the best that he could in terms of science. Now, science has now been redefined by the people who are involved in it. People like Sasha McKenzie and Dr. Quantis, you've mentioned, and plenty of other people, Mike Duffy's of the world, and et cetera, Phil Cheatham's, blah, blah, blah. Okay, but back then, we did not have access to true science in terms of measuring to get objective data. So what you had was having to make some really good observations and extrapolate that out into kind of your perception of what a 3D world would be. And Mac was very good at that. So when I started with Mac, he had really three different models that he talked about, and that was what he called a CP model, which was a basic left shift model, which you can think of as a little bit down and across, and you'd hit kind of lower kind of fades and so forth. Then you had an online model, where alignments were very standard, and then he had what he called a CF, which was, and that stands for centripetal versus centrifugal. Now we know centrifugal is a fictitious force, but it doesn't matter. That's just kind of how basically a right shift, a straight, and a left shift. And I was always a little bit of a right shifter, and so through impact, I didn't go down to the left. I kind of went a little bit more up and a little to the right. Um, so he was okay with me doing that, whereas you had like a guy like Chip Beck was much more kind of a little bit more down to the left. So he hit the ball lower and kind of cut the ball more. So Mac then what he did was he used kind of categorization and said, okay, here are guys that do it this way, here are guys that do it this way. what are the commonalities between them, and then he would look at, okay, what were mismatches, what you just couldn't do on either model, and then through that he developed a whole set of alignments, and then how you would power those alignments. So he was doing the best that he could. We just didn't have available to him the science that there is now. Now, the people, and I think there's also like the golfing machine suffered from this, where you had a number of people that are very kind of have a science bias and that really want to understand what's actually going on rather than what seems as if it's going on when you just look at 2D video. And so there's this markets out there, and these people and people like myself are very curious and want to know what's really happening. So as science has progressed, we're now at the point we can actually measure what's going on, and through that you get objective data in a three-dimensional world. And so science has really taken off because of that and because of the technology that's involved. And with the technology comes very, very smart people, and over time I'm going to go on the side of the really smart people because I think they can figure it out. And and so Mac's time I did with Mac, he did the best that he could, and it was the model that I was using actually was very good. And so I learned a lot from him. I learned about how to practice. I learned that there are instructors today, the Mike McNairys of the world, who I think is watching, still do a really good job of coaching it, and it's just really good to see a swing that you can see has been influenced by Mac, because everything looks right. It looks like where everything should be. And in my case, I led the tour in ball striking for the first year I worked with Max, which is quite an accomplishment because some great players out there hit the ball great.
Oh yeah.
And then I was third or so the next year. So not only did he able to put all these models together and categorize them in a way that made sense, that he then taught those to me, and then I could apply them, and they obviously worked for me as well. So it went beyond just kind of his way of doing it. It was he had three different ways that you could do it, and I helped kind of not legitimize, that's not the right word, but it showed that it could be taught and it could be used. So a little bit what Mac was teaching me was a little bit more of understanding what a centered pivot is, and that you could, for example, still have a shift, which he talked about. So he had still a dynamics to his backswing, where there was a shift off the ball, which you break inertia, and then, but at the same time you're rotating, so you're not swaying. You just kind of shift into the right leg, and then you rotate, and you're rotating and getting he was the first guy to me that talked about the proper bends, which is, tilting left and tilting right and forward bend and extending, which I really didn't have an understanding that was going on in the swing, in order to, how all of that, they work in concert with rotation to get your shoulders to work to more towards the center of your swing. So you stay a little bit more centered. You don't move off the ball, because remember at the time a lot of you kind of move off the ball, and Curtis Strange's kind of motion, he did fine, but he obviously did great, won 2 US Opens, and but Mac was much more going to stay more of a center pivot, and was based on a little bit more of understanding of what we used to think of in like in the golf machine, where using that centrifugal force, you have a pivot, and then you have this force that's going outward, and the amount that you pull back is going to determine how much a rightward path that you would have. So I didn't pull back as hard as some, so the hand path would drift a little out, versus some would pull harder back and get the hand path to work around. So I just applied those principles, and then the training that he did was way ahead of his time on how to train things in a kinesthetic awareness, and how to change a neurological pattern. Really fantastic. So I cannot speak enough about what Mac was trying to do, what he did, what he accomplished with the tools that he had available, and that he would seek out people and spend his own money doing a lot of research into many dimensions, from not only the golf swing, but the mental side of the game. And so it was a great time for me. I really enjoyed playing the tour. Mac was the most generous person in regards to his time, enthusiastic, passionate about the golf swing, and I learned a lot from him. So, and not only that, but I hope people always remember that he was also a very, very good golfer. He won twice on the PGA Tour, which is amazing, and was in the top 30 money winners twice. He won the Tour Championship. So, I mean, there's not many coaches can have those kind of credentials and then move into the coaching world. So that was a great time for me.
And he did it right-handed and left-handed, which is it's amazing.
Yeah, we did a clinic one time at the PGA. I was with Powerbuild at the time, and they asked me to do a clinic on the Wednesday. And Mac's like, "Oh, I'll come and do it with you." And I'm like, well, "Mac, you certainly don't have to. That's a requirement an obligation that I have to do." He goes, "No, I'll do it with you." So we were hitting balls, and he was kind of explaining some things, and I was doing some demonstrations and explaining some things, and then it was like, okay, but everyone's right-handed from a left-hander's perspective, and he asked the question, and Matt goes, "Oh, no problem." So he just turned around and started hitting balls left-handed, and just the gasps that were coming out of the audience, like they just couldn't believe that this guy was just hitting balls right-handed, turned around, and it looked like it was a miracle. It was so close to what he was doing right-handed. Didn't quite have the power. So there were some of the lag segments that from the in this case his left-handed, his right arm to chest, and a little bit on the deviation or load in his wrist weren't quite the same, but they were so close you couldn't, unless you knew what you're looking for, you couldn't tell the difference. And it was astounding. And even then I was just looking at this like, this is unbelievable to me, because it's not like that's a nice left-handed swing. That's identical looking to the right-handed swing. So it's an application of principles on both sides of the ball. It's just unheard of, right? Amazing.
I think it's an unbelievable ability to just do. And I'm sure someone posted a left-handed driver swing the other day or something. You were like, he just smashed it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, he did.
Unbelievable. Yeah.
Well, and the driver's one thing, right? It's teed up. I was practicing with him, and it was in California, and we were hitting, going through the bag, and we got to long irons, and he was hitting some shots and helping me a little bit, and then long irons, and he just pulled out his left-handed and right off the ground, just hitting 3 irons, these beautiful flights, and it's just, I'm like, gosh, that is hard to do with your normal swing, let alone turn around and do it left-handed. So it was mesmerizing. I'll never forget the first time I saw Mac play. I was in college, and the Hawaiian Open was on, and we had a college tournament at that time, and I believe this was '86. And so the coach was like, "Oh, who's everyone? Who are you gonna go watch?" And guys were talking about Paul Azinger and Greg Norman and all these other guys. I said, "I'm going to go watch Mac O'Grady," and they were like, "Mac O'Grady, he's crazy." I'm like, "Yeah, but I really like the swing, right? So I'm going to go watch him." And I went out there, and he was playing with Bobby Watkins, and he gets up the first time. I'll never forget this. He was on number 13, which at the time was a par 5. They now make the players par 4. He gets up, and Bobby hits first shot, and then Mac got up, and it was the most dynamic motion I'd ever seen at that point, and the sound of the ball and the flight and the speed, it was just like, wow. Now, I looked around, and I was the only one standing there, and I'm like, why isn't everybody out here watching this? I've never seen anything like that at that part of my career. So that's when I was like, that's what I would like to do. That's how I would like to swing. That's how I'd like to play. It's how I'd like to look. So athletic and dynamic within the motions, but everything looked like it was in the right place. So that's how and so then after that I was fortunate enough to meet Mac, and he liked me enough that he helped me. So that was great.
And amazing. I never realised, Grant, that he actually almost allowed you to go a little CF style. I presumed everybody at that time was with swinging CP. That's it.
Yeah. Well, what happened is that it's kind of funny. He goes, I got 3 models, and I would drive the ball so well, and I was hitting the ball so higher and a little bit further because of what I was doing, that he decided, he goes, okay, yep, you're hitting I like what you're just going to be CF model. So that's your model. But I was the only one that he allowed to do that. And I think it was just because he recognized that the high level that I was doing it, and he was okay with it. It's just a slight different alignments. I've got plenty of pictures at home of him and I out playing practice rounds in the tournament where I'm in the tournament. He's walking with me, but it was late at night, later in the evening on a Tuesday evening. And so we'd drop a few balls down and he would hit some shots and I would film him and then film me hitting the same shots. And when he decided, okay, we're going to have a little right bias here on the path here, it just, he could move it around no problem. It was really beautiful. I got some very, very beautiful alignments and swings that he made that were a slight CF bias that basically I used as a model. So that was
Amazing.
fun.
I think it's just amazing. And if we fast forward that on then, you know, to let's say the Quan era or this new style, and I've spoke to Dr. Quan probably 3 times, 3 weeks in a row, and he is the most fascinating person and just great guy.
Yeah. Okay. So Dr. Kwan, I got involved with him because of Chris Como, and what happened is that there was a bit of a controversy on where at the time, and I'm not. I want to make sure I'm not critical of anyone's teachings here because everyone has their preferences and their ideas, and that's fine. But at the time, there was the Stack and Tilt group, who I knew very well, Andy Plummer and Mike Bennett, who were also Mac disciples, and they preferred a slight right bias too. But the way they went about it was a little bit different than what Mac did. And they talked a lot about the Waite at the time. Not talking Waite, not talking pressure, but talking Waite was started left and it stayed left, and then it kind of went further left on the downswing. They had more slide than a rotation. So on the force plates, you're going to see a little bit more of a lateral motion, a little bit less rotational motion, and some vertical. So Chris Como was like, okay, I'm not sure if that's accurate or not. So he said, I'm going to do a stack and tilt swing. And at the time, got into coaching, and I'm, of course, I got a very curious mind, for good or for worse, and was on a lot of the biomechanist boards, looking and reading and trying to understand more about what they're talking about, because that was kind of new at the time. And so there was a lot of pushback about how Chris Como actually did the swing in the lab. And like, oh, he doesn't know how to do it because clearly the weight shift's not right and all that. And I was like, so I just volunteered and said, hey, well, everyone seems to like my swing. I'll go in there and do it. And we'll actually see where we are. And so Chris was very grateful for that. And so I developed a relationship with Chris. So I went out to TWU there with Dr. Kwan and met them. And that's how I met Dr. Kwan. And so I would swing, and we collected all the data, and he's got the dual force plates, and then he does the functional swing plane, which is after the fact stuff. But anyway, I started learning more and more about biomechanics and how they go about in the measuring and how accurate they are and what they can do, what the limitations are, and then the math behind it. And, I'm certainly not an expert in those areas. It's just beyond where I am. I'm a golf coach that's trying to get conceptual information. And then, I have my preferences, and then I apply that conceptual information to how I teach. And so Dr. Kwan has used my stuff because the force plate data was really good, and showed a really nice pattern. And so if I ever need anything or have questions, I've fortunately got access to Dr. Kwan. And I'll say this, when it comes to the math of what's going on, and now his understanding over time of being involved in studying golf swing, he's really, really far, really advanced, obviously, on the collection of data, but the understanding of how to put it all together. So it's been a really good relationship, very, very smart, and he's just a very factual guy, and is starting to figure out that, okay, I've got all this information, but I got to make it usable, and that's kind of.
And I think that he's actually learned how to make it easier for somebody to absorb it and use it now, and with his drills and things, than used to be. I remember meeting him and doing his certification a few years ago, and literally there were all these equations and pictures, and that was it. And you sort of walked away and go, okay, so now I understand your principle, but I've got no idea I'm going to use it. Whereas now it seems a lot more useful.
So that's a really, really good point, right? So look, we're in this field. We're all got the same goal. We want to help golfers. We want to play better, right? So how do you do that? I mean, so you just go out there and you just try stuff, and you just cut randomness to it, or do we have some kind of order to this? So what the researchers, and I personally believe that, like, we have the golf instructor, Golf Digest top teachers, right? And that's great because that's recognition of people's years, usually of the industry, or respect they have of their peers. But there should be a whole section that's just purely researchers, maybe the top 10 researchers, because as a golf coach, what do you teach? This is the question. What do you teach? And so what Dr. Kwan is doing is saying, okay, I'm collecting objective data from some of the best players in the world and some of the most average players that come in. It's not just about collecting data from great players. It would be the average golfer. And then we can start seeing really where there are differences, and where are the main differences? How do we help people the most? And so what Dr. Kwan is now being, over time, has gone from, okay, this making a golf swing an equation and a mathematical formula or equation, and into, okay, we got to make this usable. So there really is two dimensions to this. The researchers, and they're qualified and trained to do that. And as golf coaches, we're trained and to be on the driving range and how to communicate and how to teach people and how to apply information based on our experience of watching the people in front of us. I'm sure you have, like I've spent plenty of time in the trenches on the range, where you've got people coming up, and they're at all levels. They're at beginners all through to tour play, and you're teaching them slightly differently for a number of reasons, right? But you have to know where's the end game here, right? This player is gonna. We need to get him to this point, but here's the order he's going to do it. And people like Dr. Kwan or Sasha McKenzie or any of those PhDs, they're providing us a roadmap or a guide in order to help us, and that makes us better instructors. And through interaction with them, we've made them, as researchers, understand how to apply it to a golf swing better. So the frame of reference of when they now discuss things, they're able to do it from a golfing perspective, not just a researcher's perspective. So the idea is we're helping both sides here. So it's
and they are, in fairness to these guys, they are very open to talk about it as well. So yes. I mean, if I read a research paper from Sasha, and I sent him a message saying, "Could you please tell me what this is?" He would be on the phone and go, "I'll tell you what it is. This is what it is."
Right.
And
that's a great thing, because it just shows you that they're invested in helping, right? They're not, there isn't a sense of this is proprietary to me and I'm going to keep my information to myself and I'm going to try and utilize that on a financial way in order to maximize their industry. But what they're trying to do is they know that they need us and we need them in a large way. And that their accessibility is helping someone like yourself, and you're doing great teaching, and now you're doing some of these live broadcasts, and you're able to get information out to people to help them play better golf. And that's a direct response to the accessibility that you have to people who have information that's subjective. There's not, again, we used to go back coaching 30 years ago or even 20 years ago, was all about, it seems as if a player is doing this, and we don't really know if they were or not. As soon as we're able to look at the three-dimensionality of it, we could understand what they were actually doing. And that's really, really helped us. Now, some things we got right and some things we got wrong, and that's all perfectly fine. That's the normal order of things. I've got some things wrong in the past for sure, and that's okay, because the process of learning is you have access to people like these guys, and they can help correct your conceptual framework, and it makes you a better teacher. And our job is to develop strategies to really apply this stuff. That's all this is, right? Is we're taking information, and here are the strategies and the order that I would teach a lot of the stuff, and that can vary from player to player.
And when I look at the information that's out there, Grant, relative to the stuff that comes from the PhDs and the researchers, a lot of that stuff has been taken through three-dimensional sensors or sensors on the club, etc., or under the feet, right? When we're actually on the driving range and things, right, we don't have that luxury of knowing, you know what I mean? And I think sometimes when I look at, say, some of the Mac framework and things, of the certain alignments, let's call them, right? You can see them. They're as clear as
Mm-hmm.
day behind if the camera's in the right place. You can see that. But some of the science things you can't actually see. You can presume, or you can try and apply the logic that comes from it. But you can't actually say that's happening because you can't actually see it.
No, okay. So one of the big things that you're going to see in a lot of the research that's done now is that you literally we know that they're there, but you cannot see. For example, you cannot see a force. You cannot see you can see the angular part. You cannot see the moment of force. You cannot see a moment arm. You cannot see the pressure shift. You cannot see the ground reaction force, directional magnitude. You cannot see those things. But as a trained expert, it's the more that you spend time learning stuff, and the more times that you see an actual swinging and you see the data at the same time, the more you start to see things that kind of represent what you're talking about. So, for example, let's take net force. So everything that you do in a golf swing ends up at some net force at the handle because that's what we're hanging on to, and that net force applies this force to the handle, and the golf club reacts to that, right? So it has a direction and it has a magnitude to it. So the club responds to it. Now, when you start seeing the club respond in certain ways, you can go, oh man, okay, so we know that all the combination of everything, how I'm moving my body and my alignments and all this stuff is going to end up with the force. The club's reacting like this, so I know the force is either going through the center of mass of the club or it's not. It's causing rotation or it's not. And you can start kind of understanding how you put together. And that's just the expertise of you as the coach, your experience as a coach. And then you say, okay, yeah, and I need to change this or help this player in this order. So in order to do that, I think they're going to have to move a little different on the ground. And I think they're going to have maybe turn the body a little bit different. They need more pressure shift over here. And then you're going to watch through that transition, what the club's doing, which I really think is as important, almost as important as impact. And you
Good evening, Jamie. How are you, son? Improve that turn this afternoon in the net. 10 people, 13. Dave's arrived. Richard Edge. Bob, how are you, sir? Absolutely. He's been working on he's grand. Yeah, it's grand. Mr. McNary, how are you, sir? I wondered whether you'd be on today. Brian's here again. Brian, you must have watched every one I've done.
their pattern is good. Like I know a couple, right? They're doing that for a reason. Their brain's going, okay, I'm good. Or Brooks Koepka is doing none of that, and it's really good, right? It's outside of my preference pattern or how I think it should be done, but they're really good. So the Hall of Fame guys are saying, yeah, okay, great, good for you, but I'm not doing it that way because this obviously really works. So the question I always ask is, at the top of the backswing, you got Jack Nicklaus had a very upright arm plane, and you had Ben Hogan has a very flat arm plane. So who was right? And I'd say they both are. So that's when I was like, I really got to get past just anatomical alignments. I have my preferences. I don't like too much deviation off of those. However, I'm looking at more relationships. So the new way of kind of that I've tried to do, probably 8-10 years is much more in the line of okay, functionality in terms of relationships rather than any anatomical alignment that I think is necessary any more important than another. So, for example, if we said I like my left arm in at say 40 degrees at P3, well then I look online and Brooks Koepka's not doing it, Jack Nicklaus is not doing it, and Rory McIlroy's not doing it. The natural question from the student is, well, why am I doing it if they're not doing it, right? So you would go, yeah, okay, good point, but I just think this is what you should do. Or you would say, okay, yeah, you can play from further out the ramifications of it, but here's what we're trying to do through transition to get these relationships between how you apply force at the handle and what the club head's doing, because the closer you get to impact, the more important some of this stuff becomes. Like what I'm doing at P2 to 3 is less important. It affects what I'm doing through transition, but it's far less important than what I'm doing at P5 to P6 to P7, because I'm closer to impact and lots of forces are being generated. So I kind of look at it more as relationships rather than and necessarily anatomical alignments, but I definitely I have my preferences.
And I mean, you know, when you look at this and we talk about these different swings, different alignments and things, we take this in another direction, you know, then you being a member of Isleworth would obviously see a very, you know, a certain Tiger Woods, you know, as a player, you know, and then you look how that's changed over a period of time.
Yes.
You know.
So, okay. So here's what I say about that is when Tiger showed up, and I played with Tiger when he was, I guess he was 16 years old, maybe right before he won the U.S. Amateur. I played with him at Byron Nelson, and it was in '93. And he was already an amazing talent. You could see it. You know, I wasn't short back then, but he was 20 yards past where I was, and sometimes he'd be further, 25, 30. I'm like, wow, man, this guy's the size of the back then he was as thin as a golf club, right? So I was like, wow, this is an amazing talent. And then he showed up, he won all his course, the US amateurs, and he came out and joined Isleworth right out of when he turned pro. So, and he would come on the range and you know, there's only 2 times in life that I've had this feeling. I played with Greg Norman, the final round the third round of 1988 Masters, Australian Masters in Huntingdale in Victoria, Melbourne. And he was standing up hitting driver on some of the tightest holes where if you miss them, you're under these trees. They're called tea trees, and they're unplayable. Cannot hit them. And I'm just like, oh my God, I can't do that. I mean, he was just hitting it so far and so straight. The only good thing was then Greg would get up and hit a wedge and spin it off the green, and you're like, well, okay, I got a chance. And then the second time that happened was watching Tiger, and he was at Isleworth, and he's hitting 2 irons, and they were going so far, so high, and I'm just like, oh my gosh, I just cannot do that. And so when he came out, it was this amazing talent, but he obviously was raw, but he was just a great competitor. He never took that away from him. And that competitive instinct is what's kind of carried him through his career, because he's changed his swing, I would say, 4 times now, and he's still a great player no matter what motion he uses, right? So, however, I will say that I really enjoyed the time he was working with Butch Harmon, because I think he was got him into a really good spot, and for whatever reason happened between them did. Then we started working with Hank Haney. I didn't like that as much. I just didn't. You know, I'm not saying Hank was, you know, a bad teacher or anything. I'm just saying I just didn't like what he was doing. And then he went to Sean Foley, who tried to correct some things and do some things differently, which was good and bad. And then with Chris Comer, basically tried to getting back to where he was, but he just had physical limitations because of back surgeries and some things that I don't think was caused by golf swing. I think it was caused by his workouts that I used to watch him do, very Olympic lifting and heavy lifting. So it just goes to show you that there are many ways to do it, because he was a great player no matter what he did. But I would say that, you know, if he was just left alone, and the best analogy I've ever heard was Chris Como said this to me one day. He goes, he's kind of like this, you can pick any, like a tomato out in a field where it just happens to have the right sunshine, the right amount of rain, the soil is really good, and it's just really just this perfect kind of tomato out. And then all of a sudden the farmer comes along and goes, oh, I can make this even better, and then genetically modifies it and puts his hands and fingers all over this thing to make it like I've done this, and it just screws it up. And in the end, I think if you just
Grant, do you want to leave it until you get home?
no, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you, yeah.
Yeah, so what happened was, this is a sacrifice that I'm making, is I parked on the side of the road in a parking lot, and it got too hot in here for the phone to work. I'm still talking, but the phone gave out. So I'm
Oh
trying
dear.
to join. It says go live with you, and I'm saying go live, but it's not coming on for some reason.
Oh no, I can hear you fine now. I can't see you,
Okay.
but I can hear you. So
Well, as long as you can hear me, that's we can do it without seeing my
yeah, that
face.
doesn't matter. I can see
Okay.
you fine. There's no problems.
Okay.
So we
So
were talking about a certain Chris Como's analogy of the tomato.
yeah. So basically, what Chris is saying is that if you just left him alone, he he could have just gone on and figured things out himself. Now he just needed a little direction. He didn't need overhauls to change his swing, which is what he started to do. Which is it's just kind of, when you do that, you're interfering with motor patterns, and you're gets it really difficult for, and considering that he was playing at that level. That can be done, but again, I believe that he just was one of those once in a lifetime generation players that comes along clearly. That if you gave less information rather than more, I clearly think he'd have been in the 20s by now in majors, for sure.
And the thing is, Grant, there's sometimes I always think where, there's what a player needs to know and what a player wants to know
Yes.
can be two different things. And I certainly find sometimes that I can feel like I've given the player exactly what they needed at that moment in time, as simple as it might be. But based on their natural, almost psychology, they actually want more information to verify it in their mind that it's right
Yes.
before they use it. The problem is, the moment you give them all that information, they then almost become slightly paralyzed by it because they try and ingrain or use all of it.
Yeah. Okay. So it depends on the player, right? So in terms of that, there's no doubt. I was teaching or coaching Aaron Baddeley, for example, and in terms of Aaron Baddeley, he preferred to talk about feels and talk about pictures, and he would conceptualize it that way. He just didn't. He couldn't. Explanation didn't resonate with him. So you cannot teach that person that way. A person like Charles Howe, who I coached for a number of years, was completely different. The pictures and feels didn't mean anything to him. He just needed to create his own by providing him the information that he needed, and then he would create those on his own, and then talk through it with me as if did this make sense? And I would look at, well, it doesn't really matter what you feel, is what is the relationship we're talking about here in terms of how you're swinging the club? Is that changing or moving in the direction we want? And if it is, then I really couldn't care less what you think or feel. That's intimate to the player. So in terms of the players that you're coaching, and for example, even like the Tiger Woods example, it's okay because Tiger could obviously process a number of things because he did it and he changed his swing a number of times. But what you don't want to do is keep changing the pattern neurologically. So if you have what he was doing with Butch, and then you have what he did with Hank, and then he did with Sean, and then what he's doing with Chris, and then you throw in physical injuries, there's just some problems there. They're just going to be. And so it's unfortunate that it went that way in terms of, when you say unfortunate for a guy that's won 15 majors, but it's unfortunate that it went that way for him because his quest for improvement drove him to search that out, and clearly he was a guy who could process that. So I don't ever want to kind of go down the route in terms of instruction that says yeah, okay, you got to protect the player from themselves. You got to understand the player and talk through that on the front end, especially at that level. Now, beginner players are different. They need structure. They need the information. They need to know how to measure it or have some reference point that makes sense to them in order to so that they can know whether they're improving or not. Tour player, they're a different animal, right? So you got to
Yeah.
talk through that with the player on the front end and then make those decisions. So that's my take on it.
And I think, the thing is with tour players is, they've been there or they've got to a certain level with the swing probably that they've used for however many years.
Yeah.
It's a very dangerous game then going in and trying to change, a
Yeah.
lot of
Okay.
things.
Yeah. So again, once again, a tour player. Okay. I'm always cognizant of the fact because I played that I know the fact for a fact that I'm teeing off every Thursday with my career on the line. Literally, your career on the line. And so that you have to be aware of that. You have to understand that. And so that they may want to change, they may say they want to change, they know they have to change, but whether or not they can actually do it is a different thing because in our brain we have this thing called the amygdala. And the amygdala is a fear-based little almond-shaped thing that houses perception of emotion, which is fear and anger and all this stuff, right? So what happens is that you say, yeah, okay, I can make this change. You go to the driving range. Yeah, I can do this. No problem. That feel's going to work. And then you go to the first tee. The adrenaline goes up. There's out of bounds on the left. I can't miss to the right. And so you stand there and all of a sudden your brain goes, yeah, okay, that other stuff may be right, but I have no idea where the ball's going to go. I can do this, the other swing, which may not be correct, but I've at least played for a number of years doing that, and I can function that way. So it defaults back, and it wants to default back. So therein lies the conflict. It's not the information, and it's certainly not. We know that the changes it's trying to make are probably helpful to that player. It's an unconscious reaction by the brain to protect itself from making an error that may cost them their job, which is I just don't feel comfortable when I'm out there. So there's always some form of regression for all players, and including the amateur players when they take lessons from the coach. And this is the difficulty coaches face. They go do that, and they go, oh, yeah, I can do this, and they go out and play. Next thing you know, that, oh, I was playing great until I took a lesson from Fred over there, and now I can't play anymore, right? I'm playing worse. Well, yeah, I don't know if you're playing worse, but you feels like it because there's a conflict of what you want to do and what you have done, and it's just housed into the brain. And part of that is just so that every morning you don't have to wake up and relearn how to walk or how to eat or how to do things. It's encoded in a neural pathway in your brain, and that's what we're fighting as coaches. So you got to be careful. You got to be strategic on tour players. Like I said, amateur players, you have to talk to them about, what they're doing, give them some reference points, and whether or not their tolerance for struggle is there, because it is a struggle.
Well, and for everybody, there's a consequence to any change, even if it is, not as almost as destructive on their life. I mean, if a tour player makes the wrong judgment or decision, then that could cost them a card in the career. If the
Yes.
amateur golfer makes a bad decision, that might cost them a few weeks of playing badly and go up a few point ones. But the reality, it's not really changed their life.
No, right. So again, and this again is part of the talk that I have with players, tour players, certainly that I've coached in the past, is there is a cost to doing something. And I'll use Trevor Immelman as an example, right? So, and Trevor's a good friend of mine. So there is a cost of doing something, and there is a cost of doing nothing. So as a player, if you're playing on tour, okay, this isn't good enough, or I'm just not performing at my level. I've got to do something. And so you explore what that is. And you may talk to me, you may talk to a different coach, you may talk to whoever it is you want, and we'll come up with some plan based on our experience and our knowledge of what we think you should do, all of this stuff. And then you decide, yeah, okay, that's what I want to do. But there is a cost to doing that, which is I'm going to feel uncomfortable. I may not be able to take this to the course. So how am I going to handle that? Then if I struggle, how am I going to deal with other people supporting cast around me when they say, why are you listening to that guy, and all this kind of stuff, right? Then you have the cost of saying, well, I don't want to go through that difficulty. I'm just going to keep doing what I'm doing. But you already know it's not what you want to be doing or playing at the level that you want to play at. So you have to weigh those things as a tour player. Now, Trevor Immelman, when I first started helping Trevor, he came to me, had already won the Masters, but he'd gone into where he was playing very poorly for the standards that he has. And he really wasn't playing very well. At this point, he'd kind of, I think he'd finished out at the 125, and so I was trying to help him. And he came to me, and I was like, okay, we watched his ball flight, and I'm like, Trevor, you're a talent that is capable of winning big tournaments, but this truly is not going to work at this level with some of the ball flights that he had, and he knew it. So we talked about hitting it less low and doing some other things, and how he had to change it through wrist angles and how the application of power. Great. Driving range, he was good. You go out and play, he was okay. But as soon as he got to a tournament, his brain just could not process the ball flight, the change in ball flight from taking a 13-degree driver and launching it at 5 degrees to now he had a 9-degree driver and was launching it 11 or 12. Much better. We all know it's better, and he knew it was better, but his brain just had a hard time processing it. So in the end, he's like, I just, even this information is right. It's not going to help me because I just don't think I can get myself to do it. In which case, that's fair enough, right? That's a tough thing. So again, there is a cost of doing something and a cost of doing nothing, and you have to decide what you want to do. And even the amateur players who have limited time and resources, they don't want to go out and play bad. They want to enjoy themselves and play some better golf. But the question you ask yourself, is what I'm doing right now how I want to play golf, and is this enjoyable? If it's not, then you're just going to have to do something, and there is a cost to it.
And I think that's just great advice. I think, Grant, and on every level. And I mean, I remember going out to work with a tour player.
Yep.
End of 2018, I worked with Brett Rumford, and he'd got a bad wrist, so he'd had to have injections in it, etc. And he was just one of the great short game players of the world game. But the thing was, he was not a great driver of the ball.
Right.
So he was great short game. And you had to go, do you know what? We don't want to lose the short game, but we want to add to the long game with something. So we had some data that was done on some 3D force plates and things, and we worked out that hitting a driver with your weight on your toes and your left side's probably not the best idea. Right. So we got a bit of a problem with the path and things, and the ball's literally going everywhere. And we changed the pressure shift around, so that we didn't have to adjust his grip or his wrist or anything. Right. Now Brett was over years another Mac man. He'd worked with Mac for a long time, right? So he liked certain alignments and he liked the look of certain things. So from his perspective, he always wanted to see certain things happening. And if those things weren't happening, he didn't see past them sometimes.
Yeah.
So he would create what we had him on the force plates, a different pattern. And when they measured him on TrackMan, his numbers were phenomenal. They were literally so much better than he'd ever had, right?
Yep.
But the interesting thing is, like Trevor Immelman, it's still very difficult to trust that and play with it. So he goes out in round one, and a few of my friends follow him around and go, I can't believe he's just knocked the flag out all day. He's brilliant. I'm like, oh, great. Next day, he doesn't hit it quite as well. And he goes back to Australia because his wrist knackered and he don't play for a period of time, right?
Yeah.
And we still talk now. I spoke to him this morning, right?
Yeah.
And the thing is, at that moment in time, it wasn't necessarily wrong. It produced what he needed to produce at the time without destroying the other areas that were already amazing.
Yep.
But he wasn't able to trust it enough because it was a little different to the norm. And maybe I've learned something tonight that his brain just couldn't equate to what might happen if this didn't work.
Yeah, and again, so that's just part of how we're wired as human beings. So that's the challenge that as coaches that we face, right? We just do. We're trying to help people. We know it's going to help them, and they probably buy it. Like, this is better. I can clearly see that when you show me examples of this, there's really good players doing it. It does seem better, and then they go to the application of it, and that's where it gets challenging. So, you know, we face that as coaches, and the people face that as players. So I have a great understanding and empathy for players that at all levels, as they're trying really hard, because this is a very, very difficult game. It can be made easier by doing certain things, for sure. But at the same token, doing those things are not necessarily easy on the application when your pattern was completely different. So it's just why it has complexity, but that's why it's such a great game, is that we all are striving and all trying to get better, and it challenges us on every level, on a physical level, and it changes on an emotional level as well as a mental level. So I love the direction that the instructional industry is going, because we're getting more and more information. We're getting really, really good coaches that are really inquisitive, and they're trying really hard to understand this stuff, and then they're applying it. So I think that golf in itself, there's more educated coaches out there that are really trying hard to help players at all levels. So I really enjoy the fact that the direction that golf instruction is going. I get annoyed at times at the narrative that comes out sometimes, that I even see on Golf Channel, which is weird, because you would think that'd be very much promote golf in all parts of golf, including instruction, where I have a narrative sometimes where Brandel Chambly can be very negative towards instruction. Now, that's an important voice, an important debate to be had, but there is no other side of the debate that you hear. You tend to hear that one side, and you still hear, instructions, it's hurt more people than it's helped. Well, that's a bunch of crap. There's people who use lots of examples where instruction has helped a lot of people. Nick Faldo is one, for example, you can say is helped dramatically. He went from no majors to 5. So, golfers have changed their careers with that. And amateur golfers have gone from 20 handicappers down to 10 handicappers through good instruction. So it happens all the time. What we do need to do as an industry is continue to seek out the truth in objective information. And then you and I can hear the same thing and then think about applying it differently to people who have different strategies or different order. That's perfectly fine, because that's the art of coaching. But
Absolutely.
Instruction itself will continue to evolve, because I know the people that are involved in trying to push this industry forward on that level are very, very, very smart people, and they're all in to make this this is a great game and a difficult game, but they're all in to help people play it at the highest level that they can.
Do you know what, Grant? It's been amazing. I really thank you for taking the time out. I don't know where you are. I can just see. I've seen the same image of you for about the last 15 minutes, but I don't care. I've heard everything, and I think. Do you know what? What you said just resonates with me. I think it's absolutely spot on. And, I really appreciate you taking the time.
Yeah, no problem. I'm very sorry about the video. I was supposed to be home earlier, and I just wasn't going to make it, and I knew there were some areas that I was going to drop out in. And so it turned out I stopped, and I was underneath a tree, trying to stay cool, but I turned the car off so I wouldn't have noise with the air conditioner and everything going, and the phone overheated. Now, that's how dedicated I am, Michael. I was here I was putting my health at risk just to talk to you. But I enjoyed it. It was a nice interview and a good talk. If you ever sometime want to do it again, it's fine with me.
I'd love to, Grant. That'd be amazing. Thank you very much for your time.
Of course.
Thanks, Grant. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Yeah, bye-bye.